Good evening and welcome. It is the big finale. You, me, an amazing panel of guests, and a chance for us to find out a little bit more about how we can connect with our brands in terms of empathy and content, getting out there in a really clustered world, right? Everything is all over the place. Everything's at your fingertips. But how do we connect with our audience? How do we connect with our next client, our next customer? The right content, the right feeling, and the right amount of empathy. That's a big thing in this time of the world. It's a big thing, especially in 2020 when things are a little bit doom and gloom. Feels like the world is falling apart. It's not just one part of the world that's going through a lot. The entire world is going through this at the same time. We're at home, we've got more time with our families. I don't know, do you like them more now? But what we do know is that there's plenty of opportunity for you to engage, not just online, but with each other. And that's an important part of all of this as well. Conversations with each other, recommendations from peers is a big part of this as well. What's connecting with you, your values. That's all something that we're going to be talking about in different elements throughout the course of today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to send questions, send them through as well. We'll be asking our panelists throughout as well. I'll be introducing you to I guess everybody's from North America at this point. I'm the only South African in this mix, so I'll try and represent as much as I can. We've got Annie, Brandon, Aaron, Eric, and Patrick. I'll give you their details and credentials in a moment. I'd like to thank our partners, Vodacom, Easy Ads, Everlytic, Proudly South Africa, The Media Shop, and Wan Erfra for making this possible. Kicking things off, hanging with a pretty cool bunch of people. I had a chat with them a little earlier on. Some are from California. A lot of them are sitting in New York City right now. Minneapolis is making an appearance. Patrick Hanlon, he's the founder and CEO of Primal Branding CO and considered the Charles Darwin of branding. The original, the real McCoy. Find out more about that in a bit. Aaron LeMay, game developer, author, and entrepreneur. Brandon V. Hickson, award-winning music executive and entrepreneur. Plenty of South Africans are going to be watching him carefully. Also, Eric Solomon, Dr. Eric Solomon. He's the founder and chief brand officer at the Human OS. And Annie Scranton, the founder and president of Pace PR. Good evening and welcome. And I'd love to say welcome to South Africa. Technically, we're all up there in the cloud, but welcome to South Africa and welcome to the South African audience. Let's kick things off. What does it mean to be a brand in 2020? Annie, what does it mean from a PR perspective? What does it mean?
It means a lot of different things, but I think the common denominator for any brand who's launching or wants to be successful in 2020 is that they need to have a purpose, they need to have a vision and a mission that goes along with that, but they need to really understand their audience and what their consumers, what their customers want. It's not just enough that they want to have this really cool new product, whatever it is in whatever space. They want to know that the product and the company that they're buying into, that they feel like they can be a part of it, and also that that brand and company is doing good in the world and is sort of just, realizing the bigger picture that's happening globally and, moving beyond consumerism for the sake of buying and purchasing and making money, and that there's this sort of bigger purpose behind a brand, to be successful these days.
Brandon, from a musical perspective, what does it mean?
From a music perspective, being a brand, it's just being human. It's being human. It's being connected to people. It's being connected to culture, and in a real way, not in like not in a fake way. So like. It's funny. Sometimes I don't even like to use the word brand because people aren't necessarily brands. People are people, and I think moving forward, 2020 and beyond, I think people just want to connect with people, and if there's a product that a person uses, I guess that's how brands survive nowadays or in the future. But I think for brands, it's just about being human. It's about being more human.
Aaron, what is a brand in 2020?
A brand in 2020. I suppose from a gaming perspective, right? To me, it's about being grounded. You know, both Brandon and Annie said it really well, but I think to me, it's really about getting to the heart of like what it means to be human and what it means to have conversations and what does it mean to be of service in this world. Everything has changed like dramatically in the past, I don't know, year. 2020 has just been crazy. So from a gaming perspective, is like what does a brand mean? It's transcending brand basically. It's to get to a place of what does it really matter to be of service. That to me is what it means. That's what I see.
Eric, what is a brand for you?
I'm so glad you asked me before you asked Pat. Thank you very much for doing that. So this is some top-notch stuff everybody said, but from my perspective, I agree with a lot that was said, but I think the whole role of business is changing right now, and by that I mean, especially with what we're seeing in gaps of leadership globally. Businesses are really having to step up and ask, what role am I supposed to play in the world today? And that role can't just be about shareholder profit. It can't just be about making money. It's got to be, what am I doing to generate net positivity into the world? And so that's the direction of really brand as an outcome. It goes through everything a business does, from how they hire and fire people, to how they evaluate performance, to how they actually do communications. But that's the least interesting part for me. The part is, how do they actually, go and say, this is our role in the world, and to bring more net positivity to it.
Patrick, what is it to you?
Well, I don't think there are brands anymore. I think a brand is a misused term that means so many things that it's started to mean nothing at all to anyone. I think the real thing is that nobody really cares if you're a brand anymore, and that nobody really cares about your products anymore, and that that's your biggest problem as a company, and that you have to take this thing that has essentially become meaningless and making it meaningful. And we do that the way that we've always made things meaningful as human beings, and that is creating stories. And so the important thing at this point is that those stories have to be constructed in a certain way, because there are thousands of people trying to tell stories out there, and they have to have a certain structure to them in order to be both meaningful and to make sense, I think. And so, and that's what brings people together around people, around places, around things. And things tend to be products and services, although they can also be political or social movements and concepts like gravity or cryptocurrency or Black Lives Matter, etc.
Yeah. Well, the 80s were all about, flash, cash, excess. The 90s were a lot more about tech, and in the early 2000s as well, and people got more isolated. People were connecting with technology, and now we're using technology to connect with each other a little bit more rather than isolating ourselves from each other. It's also about, as everybody mentioned here, connecting on a human level and telling stories. So content is another word that's used quite a bit. And that's a word that people throw around. But what really is content in terms of is just throwing out an advert? Is it putting together a 15-second ad? So one brand that does really well at telling stories is Nike, where they're not selling their shoes, they're selling a lifestyle. They're selling a story. They're selling a success. They're selling a struggle. They're selling a triumph. And that's one way that they've been successful at that. But a lot of influencers as well have been out there, and they've been selling things on social media. I think there's a balance there. More and more companies are moving towards micro and micro influencers rather than the massive influencers as well. So here's the question. In terms of content, what's the right balance? We talk about empathy, we talk about authenticity, but what really sells for a brand? Is it spending a lot of money with someone with a big following, or is it about telling stories? Annie?
It's a hard question to answer because every brand is so unique and different. And so the strategy that may work for one company will likely be totally different than the strategy for another. But what you just said about authenticity, I think is something that resonates across any brand or any company or any person that's looking to have like sort of a public facing, persona or image, and digging into that authenticity and being genuine in how you communicate to your shareholders, to your clients, to your customers, is of the utmost importance. And content to me is if you have a social media, any social media, if you have a website, if you have a LinkedIn, if you can create a video, content is just putting out, messaging basically on you and your company and your brand and what you stand for. But it's really about the only right way to find the mix of what's going to work, in my opinion, is by understanding deeply who your customers are and who you're trying to reach, and then working backwards in terms of figuring out, well, what resonates with them? What do they want to hear? Where are they reading? What are they reading? What are they watching, et cetera? And then trying to immerse yourself in those content streams.
So, Patrick, you've developed and worked in different facets and different times in terms of branding and content as well. In 2020, I agree completely with Annie in terms of being authentic, making sure that your messaging is hitting the right spot with your right market. But in terms of content, how do you make sure that you create the right kind of content for your market, that it resonates when you're churning it out there?
Well, like Annie said, it depends on, it's going to vary from company to company and category to category, but and we try to apply these overarching rules to things, and it doesn't really apply. You have to do what's right for you, right? You can't be imitating Nike or Apple or Amazon or other companies. You have to do what's right for you. And the thing that is usually right is the metrics that we apply are that people need to see you, at least in the United States. It's different for different countries, mind you, but the people need to see you in 5 different places before they even are aware that you exist. And the other metric is it takes 100 hours to make a friend, which may apply everywhere. And the role of the company these days is, in terms of content, you have to keep in mind that consumers have a very curious attitude toward companies and brands these days, so-called brands these days, and in that they want to keep the brands away, but they want us to be omnipresent. They want us to be there as companies the moment that they need us, right? And so you have to spread yourself across all the social, digital, and traditional channels, as many as you can. And while you're doing that, you need to remember that your advocates, what you're trying to do is build advocacy and word of mouth. You want to feed them as much real information, facts as possible. And so that they can so that they can tell their friends all about you, and it'll be the story that you want told, because people are going to talk no matter what, right? And so you want them to say the things that you want others to hear, as opposed to mistruths or just things that people make up. People will say anything, and you may not like what they're saying about you. And so the other reason you want to give them the facts is because you want your advocates, your zealots, your fans to be able to defend you when trolls and haters, naysayers come along. So
perception is reality, right, for people. And so you're going to make sure that you're creating a reality for your audience that is authentic, that they can defend when they're haters or trolls, as you mentioned. And so you're going to continuously have that relationship with your audience by knowing who they are, as Annie mentioned earlier as well, understanding your market, and also continually to evolve with your market as they evolve in different stages. Eric, there's a message and a question from you. From your opening statement, how do companies move from creating shareholder value to corporate citizenship?
What an excellent question. And it kind of stems even with the conversation that we're having now about content. Just when you think about content, I think the last thing the world actually needs is more content. We're inundated with content. And so it's interesting to even think about what brands' roles are when it comes to that. When it comes to that question, though, of thinking about creating value for people that aren't stakeholders, the thing that I hear all the time is, well, it's just so hard to steer a ship. These big companies have been, talking about, shareholder value for a long time and only focused on profits. And the biggest thing that people have to do to make that shift is to turn that inward and look first at how you treat employees as an organization, and then of course how you treat customers. So it's saying, like, if we're truly moving to a place where all parties are thought of as valuable and not just shareholders, you get to a place where you start to make different decisions as a company. What does it mean to truly treat employees well? What does it mean to open your arms and not, hire and fire in the same way that we've been doing it for years, which is just about, evaluating people and ranking them. It really takes looking inward and saying, what are our operations doing to treat people better? And how do we treat people well? And how do we treat them with kindness and compassion? And that shouldn't be something that's off the table for businesses, and it has been for far too long.
So essentially walk the talk as a business, and that's a lot easier for you to be able to transmit to customers.
100%. I mean, and it goes to the idea of, right now it's easy to, it's something we had in the 80s where companies were say they were doing things for the environment, but they weren't. It was called greenwashing. I think what companies are doing now is kind washing. They're saying we care and we have a commitment to things, but at the end of the day, what they're doing is using all words and not backing them up with any action. And so we need them to be held accountable.
In this very strange time that we're in, we're all connecting with different things, and music has been a big part of that. Gaming has been a massive part of that around the world as well. People are connecting with each other. It's one way to connect with each other. Brandon, from a music perspective, how do you convey feeling? How do you create, when you're working with these massive stars, how do you create the right kind of music, the right kind of messaging that'll be successful?
When I deal with the artists that I deal with, it's when we think about messaging, it's more internal for the artist. It's more about we dive deeper and deeper inside the artist in their past and their current thoughts, and also what they believe and what they want for the future. And the more we dive deeper into them, that starts to create the messaging that we start to display outwards. So it's like, anytime we think about messaging, we go inside, and sometimes it's not an easy process. It's not an easy thing to look at yourself and, uncover these stones that you don't want to uncover, and you see the good things and the bad things. But I think when you do go deeper and you do find those things, and you're able to display them in a lyrical and sonic way that's pleasing, I think those innermost feelings and those inner thoughts, they really connect with the audience. Those inner truths always connect with audiences. And I think, the deeper an artist goes, the more they actually connect.
Aaron, you've been in the gaming industry for more than 20 years. Discipline is a big part of this. Discipline in terms of you as a brand, and consistency in terms of a brand is important as well when you're going out there into a market, as much as authenticity is a part of that as well. Patrick mentioned 100 hours to make a friend. That's a long time.
Yeah.
So you need to be consistent and keep that messaging. How do you convey that, or how do you correlate that in terms of advertising and gaming?
Oh, wow. I just, by that whole series of concepts that you just threw at me, it just took me in a whirlwind. I was just thinking about that 100 hours of friendship. There's so many times that just by a glance, I make a friend, so I kind of disagree a little bit with the whole 100 hours. Maybe it's just about whether it's, you need a lot of proof to make sure that person's trustworthy. But much in the same way, I feel like the discipline is really in getting deeper. Like what Brandon was saying is really important. and I just want to emphasize that to me, it's about going in deep and starting where you stand before you take any action as a company or as a brand, as a game or a musician. You got to go in deep first to understand like what's the game that you're playing. And in being in games, that's what I keep seeing over and over again, is that we have these ideas of how things should or ought to be. And they're just concepts. They're based on other people's opinions. But until you test it, until you see the extremes, we see this in every creative field, right? We got to take something to one extreme to another to understand what the actual boundaries are before we actually break a tradition, or before we actually break what a new game is, or a new science, or a new music trend, right? But until we do that work, then it's just like regurgitation of what's already been done. And in gaming, we're always looking at like, okay, what am I assuming to be true? How do I know I'm having fun in the first place? Have any of you asked what fun is? Like, I inquire into it daily. Like, how do I know this to be true? And that to me is like what's happening in society. We've been on this global pause to really take a moment to inquire, like, whoa, what am I doing as a human? Not just a company. Like, who cares like what companies are feeding me? Like, what does it mean like right now to be human? That to me is like the most important thing. And as a game developer, I'm looking at like, well, how can I help people feel better about being in life? How can I have them have more fun in this craziness that we're in? That to
Eric?
me is like the most. Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead. Continue. No, please go ahead. Continue.
I'm like, what? But to me, that's just really what it's getting to. Like right now, the whole game has changed for the planet, and what it means to like care, what it means to actually communicate. Like I often say in my talks and also my consulting and stuff like that, is like everything starts with a conversation. Everything's created from a conversation. This technology that we're on right now all came from a series of conversations. We know this in manufacturing and sales and marketing. If your conversation doesn't happen, then nothing gets bought or made. So it really gets to those core elements, those foundational elements, like what we call core gameplay in game development, right? What's the core game mechanics? Just like in music, like what are the chords that you're using? What's the tone? Like what's pleasant? You mentioned something that how something is pleasant. That to me presupposes there's unpleasant music, right? Just like there's many movies that we watch that immediately within 10 minutes we're like, yeah, this sucks. I don't want to put my attention on this. Or music or brands. Like how many brands have we looked at? We just immediately at a glance we're like, screw that. I don't want to invest my time, energy, and attention on this. In the market right now, the people, the humans of this planet are more acute to it than ever before. We see it in the politics in America where there's all this sort of like messaging because everyone knows about like language structures and like persuasion techniques. I mean, that's marketing and PR, but it's applied in not so great ways. But I believe like right now, as a humanity, that we are waking up to these things and being more present with what we're actually taking in.
Eric, you wanted to contribute to what Aaron was saying?
Well, I mean, I always happy to, but that was really just a clap. That was just clap for the humanity part of it. So I mean, it really is. The point of remembering that at the end of every transaction as a human being is really important as marketers, as people in music, as people in games. It's like we're not just transacting; we're all human beings, and it starts with that human.
Yeah, like let me tell you, like anytime I've been in a meeting where it starts getting into this sort of like higher concept of like manipulation, I'd always like bring it up to the like, hey, what are we here for? You guys, all of you who are listening to this can totally steal this. Like, what's this meaning for? Is this worth $5,000 of all of our combined time, right? As a company, it's all about the player. It's all about who's engaging, who's consuming, who's taking action. That's what I like to bring it back into any sort of meeting, because it's like otherwise it's just like wasting time, in my opinion.
Right. All right.
I think that they're 100 hours in the gaming business. For a gamer, 100 hours is nothing, Aaron.
No, it's not. It's like 5 minutes. It's like dog
Yeah.
years, right?
I think the other
I can
thing
tell
is
by how someone types. I'm like, oh, you're my friend. I like you.
yeah. I think there's a lot more intentionality, right, about what we watch and what we consume and how we do that. I don't know.
And
if
all
that's
you're talking about is like pattern recognition, right? It's like we do this since we were kids. Like, oh, you like this music, you like this fashion, you're into this person or whatever. Then in those categories, we're building out a character. Like, oh, I want to fit in with this energy, this wavelength, right? And then that's my tribe. That's who I'm going to run with. But that happens so fast. Like we forget that all of our senses are pattern recognition machines. This is what we're about. We're like looking for patterns where we fit in.
Yeah.
And what I think what's happening right now is just like we're all forced to like be with our. I can't tell you how many clients I had that right when the pandemic happened, they like called me up and like, "Hey man, how do I deal with my kids? Or how do I deal with my wife? Or how do I communicate?" Because they're faced with these sort of pattern breaks,
Right.
that they're just like, "Whoa." Anyway, I don't mean to rant so much, but it's just like it's
the other
No,
thing.
it's all right. It's
that
pretty
we
interesting. It's pretty insightful with across the board in terms of everything you said for Eric and Aaron. I love the fact that you're clapping for each other and you're agreeing with each other. And also, when you disagree, please jump in there and let us know. I love that Patrick said 100 hours. Man, that must be a
I'm
few
like,
minutes for you.
"No."
It's a lifetime for me. I get it. But here's the thing. Tracy Chapman once said, right? It's all about telling stories. And you mentioned this a little earlier, Patrick. Annie, you mentioned this as well, connecting and telling stories. So what's a good PR story? How do you create a really good PR story? Because that's an important part of this. We can create whatever we need to create, but we need to get the message out there. We need to get it out there in the right way. We need to make sure that it connects in the right way. So you can have gold, but if it's not told properly, no one's going to see it as that. So what's a really good PR story when you have the content to connect with the audience, Annie?
Well, I mean, first is understanding who exactly you want to connect with. What audience are you trying to get? And then once you understand that audience and who you want to be reaching, you have to then think about what's in it for them. What is the return on investment in learning about my company story, my path forward, et cetera? Because as Patrick said earlier, nobody really cares. There's so much content and there's so much out there. And it's just like, we have no attention span to read or watch anything for longer than like 3 seconds. And so without being able to tell your story, but it can't be in a self-serving way because who cares, and there could be a million of those out there. But if you're telling the story of a new product launch or how your company, came to be or overcame some hurdles or some issues, by taking an approach like that, you're humanizing yourself and you're also making yourself relatable to the people that you're trying to reach. And so I think just always having that in mind, that if you're pitching yourself to, your local morning news program in Tulsa, Oklahoma, okay, well, so for the residents in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when they're watching that morning show segment, what's going to keep them engaged? What's going to keep them, watching and not flipping and not turning the channel? And if you keep in mind that, they're going to stay on you if they're really engaged in your story because there's some way that they're either learning from it, they're expanding their knowledge base, there's something that's going to make their lives better in some kind of way or make humanity better in some ways. Those are sort of common themes that I think are really important when you're pitching and trying to put yourself out there.
Well, in connection with that, Brandon, from a music perspective, when you're marketing your music, marketing an artist, marketing something that you've put together, has been well thought out, how do you connect? How do you get that story out there and cut through all the noise that's out there? Eric mentioned it. There's so much out there that we're consuming all the time. How do you get it right to make sure that we're connecting with what you're putting out?
Well, the first thing, it just has to be good. That's like the simple answer. Like it just has to be good. There's a lot of there's a lot of noise, but within that noise, there's a lot of bullshit. So it's like if you have something real and you have something good, that's the first step through in cutting through. The second step that I use for the artists that I work with, there has to be something in the story for the person that's receiving it. It has to make them, it either has to make them feel proud, make them feel smart, it has to make them laugh. It has to do, the story has to do something for them. And then once the story does something for them, then they spread the story and you can stop. So we always try to craft stories that can make people feel something to the point where they actually want to spread the story. But yeah, that's it.
So, I mean, that connects with another big thing on social media. Another big thing in the digital world is viral content. Sometimes the things that people pick up and go around the world in less than an hour are things that make people feel, whether it's angry, whether it's happy, whether it's inspired. So when you're picking a theme, when you're curating, as Brandon was saying, when you're putting together and crafting a particular message, is there a particular structure or particular strategy that's behind getting it out there? Not just that's not offensive, but in a way that people will talk about it and engage with the content, not just have it there, consume it and keep it moving and keep scrolling. This is probably the most popular movement in the world. 20 years ago, this is not something that happened, but now this is the most popular movement, and this is what you want people to do, is to stop there, right? That's right. It's just keep going. So how do you make sure that when you got that out there, Annie's telling the story about it, Brandon has created it, Aaron has spent time making sure that everybody in his space who is creating it knows that it's worthwhile. Eric wants to make sure that we can engage with it meaningfully, and Patrick wants to make sure that the brand is properly being engaged with, creating the right kind of thing. So when you're creating content, how do you make sure, Patrick, that this is the product that I've got? How do I get it out there and make sure that it connects on the right level?
Yeah, well, I think that there's several approaches to that. I think it's going back to what Brandon was talking about. It's got to be good, and it's got to be something that people haven't heard before or seen before or thought before. Haven't made them laugh. All the things that you usually see that are viral are, have some aspect of that, even if it's a kiddie video. And so they haven't seen it in quite that way before. And, we look at it from more of a structural point of view, and we look at it as creating more holistically, creating a belief system and attracting people who share your beliefs, And so when you look at it that way, we break it down into creation stories, or what you mean to people. What do you want? What are your intentions out there with people and in the world? How do you identify yourself? What's the way that you act? How do you act? What do you never want to become? And what kind of words do you use? And these kind of give us subject areas that we can play around with, and it can be funny, or it can be serious, or it can be ironic, and those are and then there are tools for that, going further for that. But hope that's not too oblique, but sounds oblique to me. But I think the thing is that you have to make people laugh. You have to make people feel something, even if it's just making them feel smarter.
Expectations, that's something that's changed a lot over the years. Clients wanted a laptop and they got a laptop before from a company. Now I want you to be a little bit more engaged with humanity. So how have clients and customer expectations changed? And how has that changed how you engage as a business, as a PR company, as musicians? How do you engage on that level? So how have clients or customer expectations changed brands and change the ways that brands revolve, engage, and communicate with customers? Annie?
I mean, I think that they've demanded more, from the brands, from the companies, from the leaders of those companies. And so I certainly think that they've demanded, superiority in terms of the actual product or service that they're offering. But I also think that, there's been many seminal moments, whether it's with the Me Too movement or, salaries, discrepancies in salaries, across various companies where, there's been these moments of sort of, injustice, if you will, for lack of a broader term, where the customers and clients are demanding, that if these companies and brands want to continue to have the loyalty from their customers and from their consumers, that they need to do better in the world, and they need to make sure that that's sort of at the forefront of all of that. But I also think, just as you were talking about with regards to social media, there's an opportunity for brands to continually be in touch with their customers and clients about any new offerings or any new aspect of their brand or of the company. And so I do think that there's this sense of urgency where, it's like, I know if I order something on Seamless and it's late, I'm like, okay, where is it? And I'm messaging them on Twitter and I'm like, do I get my $5 off coupon because it wasn't here? It's like, it's just changed the way that this customer experience is happening. I don't know if that's like for better or worse necessarily, because I just finished watching the documentary, The Social Dilemma, last night, which was crazy. And so I think it's just, like, remember when you used to have something that didn't get delivered on time and you would have to like call a 1-800 number and try to like get someone on the phone to like track your order or whatever. It's like, that doesn't even compute anymore, to today's. And so it's so fast paced. It's like, I need this instant gratification, but at the same time, I think consumers also want to know that they can feel good about, who they're spending their money with. So there's kind of both of those tracks that have changed.
Well, Annie, what do you think the role of influencers are in this particular time, right? How important is using influencers on social media for campaigns, especially when you want to engage?
I mean, again, I think the overarching answer is it's just different for every single company, person, brand out there. There's not one formula that's going to work for everyone. But I personally feel like influencers are not as important as they used to be. I think for a couple of reasons. One, I think it's become much more obvious now to, the layperson who's not involved in the media in any way, where they can discern, okay, this influencer is clearly like hawking a product, as opposed to it being, a genuine, authentic post on why they enjoy using X, Y, or Z. And I also just think in terms of the pandemic now, it's like, I don't know, I just think people's perceptions have changed. Like, I don't think that they care about like what lip gloss Kim Kardashian is wearing the same way that they used to. I just think there's other things that are more important and that have come to the forefront. So, I feel hopeful that influencers like frontline workers and doctors who are on TV all the time, or brands that are really, trying to do good in the world, that, maybe those people can become more of the influencers we should all be paying attention to.
So the definition of influencer perhaps is changing. Essentially, it's no longer the Kim Kardashians. It's no longer, well, to a lesser degree, the biggest stars, and more the people who you trust, whether it's someone you know or not, someone who's maybe living their brand authentically or pushing a particular brand, and people who have used it in your own life, who are a little bit more influential than those who you used to see on TV being glitz and glamour. In terms of music, it's all about the hype, right? So you do need some form of influence. You need people out there pushing the brand, people saying, hey, this is good. Hey, this is what I need to do. That's essentially what a review is. But now we want peer reviews of things. So influencers in terms of music and pushing those kind of products, creative products, even if you've got a product that you need to push out to a younger generation and music playing a big part of that, how important is it for people to have influencers in that kind of sphere? Brandon.
Oh, just me. No, in regards to, so for my artist, we do work with a lot of brands, and we do push products, but it's all lifestyle driven. I think it's very important to have artists push out messages, especially messages that they believe in. But it has to be real though. It has to be a real part of them, their lifestyle, what they use, what they think. Like it just has to be real. And sometimes it's funny. Sometimes even when it's real, sometimes it still doesn't work, and it's only because like a company might have the wrong idea of how an artist works, or like they may not understand the culture that the artist is really a part of, and they like the idea of this big shiny celebrity, or even a smaller micro influencer, but they don't really understand the culture. So when they and it might be a product that influencer actually uses, but then when the influencer tries to connect with their audience in a certain way, and then the brand's like, no, we need it like this, or we need it like that, and you need to say it like this, and it's like, well, that's not how this influencer speaks to their audience, and then sometimes it just doesn't work. But I think artists, influencers, I think it's going to continue to be a big thing. I just think brands have to understand how to do it right, because there is a right and a wrong way.
So Eric, how do we get it right? How are we connecting with audiences? The three biggest ways that brands can connect with audiences. How do we get it right?
With respect to the conversation, the full disclosure is I spent, before I started my own company, I was at Instagram and YouTube. So I spent a lot of time thinking about exactly this question throughout the years of connection and how do you do it. And, I really come to being like, the first thing that you really got to do is simply, and it sounds so simple, but people miss this all the time, is add value to somebody's life. The second that you start to just be like, I'm going to be out there and talking about myself, it's the same as human beings, right? If somebody goes out there and all they want to do is like pump up their own ego and talk about who they are, you don't want, you're like, what role do you play in my life? So brands have to add value. I think, the second thing is really, something that we've talked about all along, but it's no longer about, the product that you sell alone. There's so much. I mean, all you have to do is go on Amazon, and I was just doing this the other day looking for a space heater, and there's like 15,000 space heaters, all with 15,000 reviews. So products are at parity. So the question is, how do you get beyond the product to go to something deeper and more meaningful? And then I think the third one is something that Pat said, I think, at the start of the conversation, which is understanding that, and it's hard to hear this as if you're a brand owner, but nobody really cares. And that's something we have to remind ourselves. The brain is a big place. And when you start to work on a brand, either internally or, if you're part of a company that you work on a brand internally, or you're an agency, you start to get into this idea that people really care about the thing you're working on. And people care about much bigger things than that, especially right now. Nobody cares about your brand. So you have to go with the perspective of, of saying at the start of it that what you have to do, if it doesn't add value and if it doesn't really do that connection on a deeper level, you're not going to ever break through, because nobody cares about you.
Reassessment and evaluation as a brand is pretty important, and evolution is pretty important as well. Patrick, in terms of surviving, in terms of navigating through a space, we're in the digital age right now. How important is it for brands to break the mold and to break boundaries? How important is it for them to try new things? Is it the best thing to stay safe to what you know already? Or is it important for you to break the mold and try and find new ways to engage?
Well, it depends where you are. I mean, I think if you're being successful and you're at the top of the mountain, you follow your success, right? But I think that the other thing, working off of what Brandon was talking about and then Eric was talking about, is that we're in a period here of transformation, I think. And that transformation is that there are still companies out there that work off of the old hierarchical model of top-down marketing, where We will talk and the consumer will listen. And we've been out of that for about 10, 15 years now. And so at least the last decade. But there are some companies who can't, and individuals at those companies, I guess, who can't get that out of their head. And so that's when you run into these things, that's when you run into, here's what you need to hear about us. And that's the top down, what the people are really talking about. And bear in mind, as I said earlier, 80 or 90%, depending what stats you read, of the consuming public out there thinks that you're lying to them. They automatically think that's whatever you're saying is an untruth. So given that, you go to influencers and try to get them to help you out, or you go to musicians and try to get them to help you out, and hopefully those adjacencies work. And but you're still trying to tell, the artist, well, here's how we should sell our bottle of whatever, or a box of whatever, right? And that's still that top-down thinking. So you think that by imposing your point of view, you think that people care about your point of view, which is wrong, first of all. So what you really need to do is let the artist or the influencer, and the artist isn't just another form of influencer, right? Do it in their own tone of voice, their own personality, and the way they do it. The other thing that was important about what Eric was saying is that when we're so focused on our product or our service, despite the fact that there are hundreds of people like us, or even thousands, if you're selling space heaters, I guess, is that we all belong to different pods, different communities. We belong to a family. We have a work community. We're a soccer fan. We're a rugby fan. We are a music fan. We play games. We read newspapers. We don't read newspapers. All of these things are different adjacencies. We're into fashion. We're into beer, right? And these are all beer, not wine, not tequila or vodka, right? And so we're in all of these different places, and as human beings, and we rub up against all these different things. And so that's why some of the smarter marketers are, doing things where they are rubbing up against, they know that you like in certain kinds of fashion, and you also, guess what, go out to eat, have dinner at different restaurants and so forth. So they combine these partnerships together, and there's more and more of that. But I think that the real thing is that there are always going to be performance marketers. Most clients are going after the same thing. They're all going after the numbers, right? Positive numbers. And whether they're doing that through performance marketing and attribution or some other means, there's always that. But I think there's also another thing going on here, and that is that working off of fear, basically, and scarcity, whereas some people in some parts of the world these days are talking about working off a totally different mindset, which is more about abundance. It's about diversity. It's about growth and more positivity, if you will, rather than fear-based. But when you get down into the weeds in some organizations, a lot of people are running on fear, and they run on and oftentimes they make bad decisions, and they try to force or impose their point of view on performers or the marketplace or on consumers, and have bad outcomes as a result. And so I think so we are in a period of transition, and that's where I would go. I would go more toward positivity. I would go more from listening to what the crowd and your consumers have to say about you, because people care much more about what your consumers have to say about you than they care about what you have to say about yourself.
100%. Annie, in terms of getting your message out there, what are some of the tools, the communication tools that you always have in your arsenal when you're trying to get a message out there? So irrespective of the kind of campaign it might be, Patrick mentioned that, and it's true, we're all complex beings. We like different things. We have different roles that we're playing and different spaces all the time. So the message can't be uniform. But what are some of the key communication tools that you use that can be applied universally to really get a message across?
Yeah, so at my firm, we focus on traditional media. And I mean, there's so many different ways to get your message out, whether it's social media, direct marketing, advertising, your sponsored content, whatever. We focus on traditional media, which means earned media. So you're picking up a real newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or you're listening to NPR, you're reading a magazine or reading Business Insider, et cetera. A real article that a journalist, who has years of experience has vetted and decided to write about. So I think some tips for sort of tackling the traditional media is to identify first, what are the top sort of outlets that you would like to see yourself or your brand or company featured in? And I would advise to do a mix of local media, typically speaking, just because it's easier to get local press. If your company is based in Minneapolis, you can go to all the local Minneapolis papers, TV networks, et cetera, and they'll be more likely to cover you because you're based in their market. There's also, every industry has various trade publications. So, publicists like myself read PR News. And so every industry has their own trade publications. Those are a really good place to start, even before local press, because it's easier to sort of get recognized in those trade publications, but also it gives you sort of hopefully that credibility and legitimacy sort of piece on your company. And likely those reporters are going to be able and interested in taking a deeper dive into what you're doing. And when you're trying to go after like big tier one sort of media and reporters, my biggest piece of advice would be to research the specific reporter that you're pitching, see what types of articles she or he has written recently. If your dream is to be on Morning Joe, watch Morning Joe for a week before you pitch and make sure that you understand the types of segments that they are actually doing. It's really not rocket science. It's not hard, but you have to be thoughtful about your approach because journalists are overworked and underpaid, and they don't owe you anything. They do not owe you a response. They don't owe you an article. And so you have to really, sort of serve them up something that's going to help them. And what helps them? A really great title on an article that's going to get a lot of clicks, that's going to get a lot of people talking. So, try to think of a unique way to get yourself out there. Like, quick story, my colleague Alex was working with this fitness instructor, and he was like, I want to get on TV, I want to, get out there, et cetera, et cetera. And, there's like 700 million fitness instructors in New York City, right? So how are we going to get this guy to stand out? She actually helped him sort of be the one who created the dad bod workout, And so, like, I don't know if you all remember that, but that was kind of a big thing like several years ago. And really, what was different about it? Nothing. But it's just that it was packaged up in a way where, dads who wanted to get rid of their dad bod could do these series of exercises, and it became this whole sort of like moment thing. So to try to think outside the box of like, okay, there's so many other people in my field, but how can I sort of put a spin on or tee up what I'm doing in a way that's going to be fresh?
You touched on it a little bit. Brandon spoke about it a little bit earlier on as well. It's about starting with the community, starting with what's nearby as well. Glocalization is a word that's popping around as well. Local, but being able to share that with a bigger audience. And the world is a smaller place now because of social media. So starting local. I read an article the other day that the craft beer market in the United States of America has gone up 600% in the last decade. That's mainly because millennials are spending more money on what's local. They want to spend more and support smaller business, smaller brands, things that are appealing more to them, that appeal to their values. And I think that's a message across the board that we've been speaking about throughout this course of this hour, making sure that your message resonates, like Eric said, making sure that you have thought about what you're going to do, like Erin said, making sure that if you're getting a message out there that you've thought a little bit deeper about it and you're not just saying it like Brandon put together. Annie, making sure that the right message is getting out there. In regards to Patrick, making sure that you've really thought about how you're going to put it out there and really thought about the messaging around it and making sure that it resonates and that you're speaking to people, not speaking at people. That's an important message across the board as well. We're about to wrap things up, but one last thing across the board, as we wrap things up, as a brand, in your own words, 30 seconds, in 2020, moving into 2021 and beyond, what's one thing, one piece of advice you would have for a brand wanting to connect with an audience? Authenticity, we've got. Making sure that we connect, we got. What's the one thing that you would advise someone in terms of connecting with an audience? We're going to end off with Annie this time because we keep picking on her first. So we're going to end off with the Rose. So Patrick, what's your one piece of advice?
Well, think of your brand as a community and of like-minded people, and think about how you're going to build that community.
Eric?
We've been talking around the idea of empathy, which is trying to see something through somebody else's eyes. And in order to do that, you've got to have curiosity and understanding. So those are the two things. Be curious about who you're talking to and really understand them.
Aaron, creativity is a big part of your world. What's your one
Yes.
piece of advice?
Think of the brand as an entity, and that and lead with wonder, not judgment. Be present. That's what I would give advice to. Just be present, be aware, and look at what the game is giving back to you.
Brandon?
I'll keep it simple. Just be human. That's it.
Annie?
I think that if you want to get your brand out there, obviously I'm going to mention PR. I think take whether it's 5 to 10 minutes every week. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time, but put effort into researching a local news outlet or a reporter that you think would be really great to tell your story, and set a calendar reminder and spend a little bit of time every week researching what that reporter or producer is covering and trying to work on a pitch that you could send out there, because I do believe traditional media is a great way to get your brand out there and recognized.
Yeah, please, Patrick, go ahead.
PR is huge, and people think that sometimes people think that because it's traditional that it is, we have to go over here on Twitter or something else. But the good old-fashioned PR is a great piece in the media mix, huge piece of the media mix, I would say. Boom.
Being authentic, being human, keeping it simple, connecting, research, being creative, making sure that you're out there and you're engaging. And as Eric said, be curious about who you're speaking about, getting to know them and evolving with them. We might have different accents, but we all have the same mission. That's connecting with each other, right? Mm-hmm. So, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. That's the phrase that's pretty popular in South Africa. It's been exported. I know that Ubuntu was an operating software at some point, was a program at some point, but it comes from South Africa. Ubuntu means humanity. And we have the cradle of mankind in South Africa. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu is a phrase that means a person is a person because of other people. You cannot exist because without other people. And that's exactly what this is all about. Humanity, authenticity. Thank you so much for your time, whether you're from Minneapolis or you in New York City, California. You could be in the Karoo, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Wesselsbron, Brakpan. It doesn't matter. We're going to connect with you anyhow, anywhere. Thank you so much for your time, Annie, Brandon, Aaron, Eric, and Patrick. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you. And I hope you have a fantastic time. Like I said to Eric earlier on, he's originally from California. We've had a couple earthquakes here in Cape Town in South Africa. Only one bar stool fell over, but one day we'll reach your heights, my man. One day we'll get there. Real earthquakes. We'll get there. We'll be big one day. Thank you so much for your time. Cheers, guys.